Hello, I'm Jacqueline Holstead, and you are listening to On Point Conversations. In this podcast series, we share creative marketing, content, and branding strategies that help your business successfully navigate the new normal marketing environment. In my podcast today, I want to talk about grant writing and application for small businesses. Now, most people associate grants with nonprofit organizations because the nonprofits don't generate their own revenue. And while that's very correct, there's a whole world out there of small business grants available, especially right now during this time of pandemic and COVID-19. Many small businesses have really fallen through the cracks and are barely holding up. So applying for a grant is a great way to gain funding to recuperate some of that financial loss. The first thing you want to do in grants and securing grants is do some research. So in this particular case, I would start with your state. Now, I live in Washington State. And I applied for a grant last year and did get it. So I was successful in getting that. What I would do is get on your browser or wherever and put in keywords, your state. So I put in grants for Washington State for small businesses. And while there are all kinds of organizations that can give you grants and you can filter through, there's a place called Grant Watch. I wanted to start with something that was free and get myself in there with something that was available within my area. So the first thing I would do is, again, search and research grants. And there are more available now, I think, than there have been, although I've started just looking in the last couple of years. And I'm excited about it because grants for small businesses means that, for me anyway, what it did is it helped me recoup some of the costs for technology that I needed to upgrade when I was doing all of my work out of my home office. It helped me with things that I needed to update my router and my technology. I made some big changes on my website. I redid my whole website. I resigned everything, did a new logo, really did some really branding work during this period of time. So don't say you can't do it. Just try to look for those opportunities for your grants within your area and do a search. Now, I just was on this morning and I saw some for like the Seattle Chamber of Commerce and the Washington State Chamber of Commerce. So again, any state that you're in, go ahead and look where you might be able to get the grant. If you're a farmer, there's farming types of grants. There's all different kinds of grants. So today what I'm going to do is, since all different grants ask for different things in different ways, I'm going to give you some very, very important points, but also some very basic points for when you find that grant and you want to fill it out. Because the easiest part is finding it. It's not necessarily the easiest part filling it out. You are not guaranteed a grant because you fill out the paperwork. So I would suggest that if you find grants, several of them, that you fill out several of them. Look at the deadlines that they offer. Allow yourself time to put it together. Don't try to do it at the last minute because there might be some things that you need before that, and you can't get it if you wait till the very last minute. And also when they might start opening up grants. So the first thing that you want to do is think about what it takes to write a grant for a small business. You want to check the requirements of the grant. Don't waste your time if you don't fall within the requirements. And there are specific requirements, and they're usually pretty specific about the size of the small business, number of employees, when you were in business. It really depends. And then there are probably, in cases, what doesn't apply. So you want to go through all that and make sure that you're not wasting your time. So you're looking at specifically the grants that apply to you. Usually grants will have, in fact, most of the time, they have very specific guidelines as far as how the application is supposed to look. So look through those requirements very carefully, because a small mistake can really prevent you from getting that grant. Because remember, there is really at this point, there's no relationship between the grantor and you. it would be good if there was, and if you can, maybe develop some kind of relationship, that's great. But usually you're just sending a grant into an organization. So you want to follow what their requirements are specifically. So things like if they say double spacing, double space. If they're asking for 11-point Roman times Roman font, just do that. Just make sure you align with whatever they're looking for. And also, if your grant's requiring something like the promotion of medical research or something along that line, really highlight your company's accomplishments and activities in this area. So it's very clear, because remember, the people looking at your grant, if they have no personal relationship with you and nothing, they're looking at either visuals that you've sent them or your written explanation, and they're taking it totally from that. Structure your grant proposal correctly. So ideally, you'll probably have these types of things that they're going to ask you for. They're going to ask you for a cover letter. Make sure you give them a cover letter, an executive summary, your statement of need or your problem statement, definitely a project description, and be very clear what your project description is. Be clear and concise. Your goals and objectives, the budget information, estimates. If you're getting reimbursed for costs, you'll need to make sure and put your receipts in, and staffing. Now, not all grant proposals are going to match that template, but many of them do, and you can be thinking about that before you even apply those particular points. And remember that you're competing with many other companies for the same amount of money, so you want to stand out. I think the most important part here is the executive summary. And that's because if people don't get past the executive summary, you have no chance. So the first thing is really look at how you describe the executive summary, how you put it clearly into words. This usually includes also what your project is. And if the grant proposal says, do it in 2 sentences, do it in 2 sentences. If it says 500 words, do it in 500 words, even though it might say, do it in 500 words, but you can do more. Keep it within the guidelines of the grant. Highlight your value proposition and what issues your company will address. And make sure to write very precisely directed toward the grant. Don't speak in generalities, and don't answer a question that isn't there. So really look at the question and answer specifically what the question is asking for. Be very professional. As I said before, write clearly. Don't use industry-specific language unless it's part of the grant and unless that's what you need to do. But don't use jargon, or be careful of using any acronyms or things that something reviewer might not understand. Because a grant proposal that's too long and too complex will really leave the reader uninterested in your proposal. Use things like spell check. I don't use Grammarly, but Grammarly might be a tool for you, just to make sure that you've proofread your writing and have other people look at it. In fact, have someone look at it that's not familiar with what you're doing, so they can really provide you feedback on what is working and what isn't in your descriptions. And if you can, within your company, have somewhat of a grant writing team, because it helps to have different perspectives. It helps also that you have different expertise and experience. In this particular time, and as I said before, the COVID-19, the pandemic, there are more, I think, more small business grants available, or maybe there's also more focus on small grants available. We will have to see what kind of government funding there is, but I would encourage you to not be discouraged by applying for a grant and not getting it. Again, you're applying, you're putting your best foot forward, you're doing all the things we talked about, and you can do it multiple times. You find other grants that you can apply for, you apply for that. Look carefully at the deadlines, because some of them are very close and you may need to be working quickly on that. And if you submit it after the deadline, they're not going to really look at your proposal anyway. So this is all bound to say, be very professional in what you're doing. Now, one of the other things is that grants, the people who are reading your grant, there is a a course called Charting Impact, and it's 5 questions. And it's a course for you to take, not a course like a teaching course, but 5 questions that you can look at to make sure that your grant proposal addresses these. Now, you might not be asked these directly in the grant, but be thinking about these as you put your grant together. The first one is, what is your organization aiming to accomplish? What are you trying to really accomplish with this? Now, if you're trying to financially recoup from some costs that you had to have during this time, be sure to cover that. Be clear and concise about what you're trying to do and how you're going to try to do it. Because the second step is, what are your strategies for making this happen? Now, if this is a reimbursement of costs already taken, then it's a whole other thing. But if you're doing something that's a little bit out of the box and it's not like that, then look at the strategies for making this happen. And step 3 is, what is your organization's capacities for doing this? If you have a huge vision and even though you have all the estimates in place for it, the chances of getting a grant, if the grantor doesn't feel that you have the organization in place to actually do the project, then the chances are slim too. So make sure that you really have what your capabilities are for this. What people resources you have that are outside of the money that you've got, what other type of resources that you're using for this project. The 4th step in the charting impact is, how will your organization know if you're making progress? This is very important. And then also the 5th one is, what have or haven't you accomplished so far? So maybe you've already accomplished some things toward that goal and you want to make that clear to the grantor as this is what you've done. These are just 5 general questions. And as I said, you're going to end up having a question that's going to be specific to the grant. But they're important to think about and make sure that within the grant, if they're not asking it directly, you've even just taken the opportunity to provide your expertise. Some grants will ask you for a timeline, so you want to have a timeline in place. Some grants will ask you for your expenses from the entire project, which means that you might not be asking or getting in a grant all the money that it's going to take to do this entire project, but you want to give them an idea of how you're going to accomplish this project. Maybe you have resources internally that you can use. So it's a well-rounded picture of what you're asking for and giving the grantor a feeling of stability and solidness in the way that you're asking for it and in what you're asking for. Anyway, I hope that helps you today. It's very general. If you want to get a hold of me with any specific questions, you can always reach me at my website, which is onpointthinking.com. I have a contact section, and I read all the contacts information and questions that I get. So send me your information or your questions. I'll be happy to answer them. Anyway, that is grant writing for today in general, and hope that your grant writing opportunities are successful. Thank you. Thank you for listening, and I invite you to join me next week as we talk more about specific actions you can take to reach your own business goals. You can find my library of other inspiring podcasts like this one at onpointthinking.com. Again, thank you for listening. This is Jacqueline Holstead at On Point Conversations.